Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Wherever you're listening and whatever platform you're listening to us on, just know, as always, your support is greatly appreciated. A special thanks to everyone liking and sharing our posts on social media, which helps tremendously with getting the word of this podcast out there. Thank you again. Today's topic is one that's more relevant now than ever before. Every year, it seems more and more coaches are going away from the traditional 1 through 5, either by choice or in some cases by necessity. The growth of positionless basketball has truly been tremendous, and one that's opened up the game for a lot of coaches and for a lot of players. So today we're going to talk to a coach who is passionate about positionless basketball, and we're going to discuss it from a philosophical point of view as well as get into some X's and O's. So we're going to get into everything here in this conversation. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Coach Levi Wenrich. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Hey, Coach, I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Really excited to get going.
I appreciate you taking the time as we're going to get into it, Coach. You wear many hats and you are a busy person, especially around basketball season. So let's get into that, Coach. Go ahead and give us an introduction to yourself, your basketball journey, your coaching journey. Where's it taken you, and all the hats you currently wear right now?
Yeah, absolutely. A wise guy once told me, if you can't do anything great, do a lot of things average, right? So that's kind of what I'm living right now. No, right now I'm currently the head basketball coach at Cal State High School, and we are a brand new high school. So we're in year 2. We opened up last year with a freshman class only, and we're adding a class under them every year. And so opening that school has been a ton of fun challenges, especially dealing with the year of 2020, but been enjoying that. I'm also lucky enough to be a volunteer assistant coach at Masters University for our women's program, which has been an awesome experience, and we want to get into that, absolutely. And then in the off season, if as you know, there is no such thing, but in the off season, me and my wife, we get to run a program called Strive Basketball, which is a development program and travel ball team. We coach high school kids and junior high kids from all different areas and different high schools with the purpose of reaching our potential on the court and off. And for those that are looking to compete, helping guys get recruited at the next level. Last year, we had our very first graduating class, and we're excited to say that we had our first 2 guys place collegiately, which was a ton of fun. And looks like in our next class, although they're dealing with some issues and challenges of this year, we'll have a couple more coming in the next few months. So it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And I'm really happy to hear the success. And I know that 2020 has definitely thrown some challenges your way and thrown it to a lot of programs, but especially for you in the situation with the high school program as well, trying to, get things going, second year and get things moving along. And then you have a, worldwide pandemic hit and things kind of get thrown for a loop. That's for sure. So I want to ask you, because you're working with, it seems like every age pretty much. You talked about all the way from junior high to in the off season in quotes, high school, college. You're working at all different levels. So I want to ask you, working all of those different levels and seeing all those different skill sets, number one, how do you sort of balance that and, put on your high school coaching hat, and then you're putting on your collegiate coaching hat, and also how does being exposed and coaching at one level help you with the other levels?
Oh yeah. To be honest, Coach, it's been so awesome. I'm just extremely grateful that a lot of stars have aligned in order for this to happen. Starting with a brand new high school and only having a freshman class, having Coach Dan Waldeck and Coach Sidney Emery over at Masters University just being so welcoming. Coach Dan, he was a big reason why I even made my high school team, let alone was able to play collegiately. I worked with him at a young age. And so just maintaining that relationship as a mentor and a friend They're awesome. Have an open door policy with me where I don't miss much because I'm able to schedule around practices and around games. Any games I do miss, I'm staying connected via Synergy. But in terms of just constant communication every day, it's just great to be around. For them, I try to just find whatever niche I can bring value in, but I'm really there to learn from our girls, learn from the coaching staff. Masters gives me the chance to be in a room with people who know more and people who have done more as athletes. And so I get to be an observer, and they've allowed me, as gracious as they are, to be hands-on in everything from recruiting to scouting to game prep and skill development. They let me get involved with a little bit of everything, which is, I couldn't ask for more. But it's really an ideal way for me to learn because there's a full circle. I kind of get the full cycle of, with the high school, I get the chance to see and develop a program and a team and a family that's year round. And I get to see firsthand what our kids go through, the challenges they get to go through on the court, in the classroom, and at home on a regular year round schedule. And so that puts a lot of things in perspective for me and for our coaching staff there. With the travel ball program and the skill development program that we run, I get to see at times there's a clash between high school coaches and travel ball coaches,
Sure.
As well as skills trainers, which I'm sure you're aware of. But being involved in all aspects of it, I can kind of get the best of both worlds of understanding how these two groups could work together and why it's essential for them to work together, for them to be successful, and more importantly, the kids to have a chance to go on and do some things and reach their potential. But really, all three things have come together for me as like a melting pot of giving me the full circle of skill development in the off season, what the travel ball schedule is like, how that kind of comes together with the high school program. With travel ball, we get the benefit of coaching kids from different high schools. So it's not just a feeding program for Castec High School. And so what that does as a coach is it's a really fun challenge because we have to find a way basically to, with very minimal practice time, how do we create a system where we can be creative, we can be competitive, and yet we can send kids back to their high school programs more skilled and more knowledgeable about the game. And that's a really fun challenge. And so figuring all that out it's just made me and our coaching staff better coaches. But basically those two things working together, and then with Masters University, allowing me to do what they allow me to do, it's a lot for a lot of our athletes. It's the end game, competing at the collegiate level. It's what they're trying to get to. And so with Strive, I'm the guy who's contacting these college coaches. I'm the guy bugging you and calling and emailing. And where on Masters, I'm on the other side of the coin. And so I get to kind of see and read what works and how there's so many decisions made in order to see if this kid is a fit for your program. And so getting to see all three perspectives of those things come together, in some ways I get to really live the life of an athlete full year round from their point of view.
You kind of have the whole life cycle.
Yeah. And so for me, it's the best way to learn. I like being hands-on. I like being in there and just mixing it up and taking chances. And I to be honest with you, I just lucked into it. I got back into coaching. I started in coaching in 2012, right after I graduated and got done playing myself, and just really missed the game. Wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do after college. And so we had some family health issues. So I moved back home and just started working and connected with an old coach, an old mentor of mine, and he was running a travel program. So I first got connected there just to get back in there on the skill development side. I just really miss being around it. And from there, kind of connected with my old high school coach and started assisting there. And it just kind of snowballed. So the system and the way it's come together is kind of crazy, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
I think that something I've personally learned in talking to so many coaches who have, reached out and maybe gone back to whether it was a former coach that they had or a former, trainer who's out coaching or running a camp or whatever. I think I've learned personally, just as a coach, to like tell my players, like, if you miss this sport and you want to like give back and you want to coach, you want to help me out, like come back and do it. I know as a coach for me, like that would be such a great honor to have, a former player come back. And it's always interesting to talk to how many coaches I talk to who, after they're done playing, they miss the game and they want to give back to the game. And one of the easiest people to contact is their former coach. And so I think that's awesome when you kind of like, you miss it and you have an opportunity that opens up for you to kind of jump right back in it, and then look at all these doors that have opened up for you since then, right?
Totally. Yeah, I was really lucky. I had some great coaches and great mentors from, Coach Kelly at Hart High School, and everybody else. Just they did something right. I mean, I wanted to come back and learn from them, so I wasn't tired of them yelling at me yet. So yeah, it's a huge compliment, I think, as a coach, if that does happen. That's a special thing, no doubt.
Now, let me ask before we get into this topic of positionless basketball, because you are in a unique situation. I'm not sure if I've talked to a guest who's really, really building a program kind of ground up. So I want to touch on that really quickly. In your experience at Castic, what did you find maybe in that year one when you're there with the program? What were some things that you found like really surprising? What were some little obstacles you had in the way? What were some successes? Just what is it like kind of really going ground up, building a program?
Yeah. I think the biggest jump to going from an assistant to a head coach at any level is how much administration stuff you're taking over. That's obviously it. And my old high school coach told me all the time, you got the best job in the world. You just show up to practice and coach. He says, and he was 100% right. But the biggest thing for us that was a challenge was just having so many players that had very little or no experience. Only having freshmen and not allowing us to run a varsity program yet. Most guys, at least the best freshmen and sophomores are expecting to play 3 to 4 years of varsity. That's kind of how it is in our area. And so you're not getting a ton of talent, and we knew that going in. But the biggest challenge was just trying to instill a culture of how we work on the court and how we treat people off the court, and just getting an understanding of, look, the results will take care of themselves, good or bad, but we just want to know that we handled everything we could in regards to preparation. And so we found ourselves teaching a lot of basic fundamentals, which was great because it was a big change from what we've done the past few years, the guys that I coach with and myself. But the biggest challenges with a brand new school is just creating that culture where I was lucky to be a part of some really good ones, of what our players were about in the classroom, what they were about on the court, and how they handled themselves off the court. That was already instilled, and I learned from it as a player, and then I helped emphasize it as an assistant coach. But when you're starting from scratch, all that culture stuff is coming from you. And so really taking that with only freshmen and not having any senior leadership and no upperclassmen, these guys are experiencing a lot of new things with nobody else to look up to but our coaching staff,
True.
And so that was one of the biggest things, where a lot of times some of your best coaching can be done through your seniors, and having them, even just communicate with the team through simple drills and just simple exercises, and just communicating things that they've handled well, things they've handled poorly, and just being open and raw about it. Sometimes they learn more from each other than they ever could from us. Right. And so we had to be those seniors. So that was definitely a challenge. And on top of just, it's not just our program that's new, it's every program in the campus. A lot of our admin, and they've done a phenomenal job, but they got promoted just like we did. So they're in new positions. And so really we're all just kind of in this big experiment together and try to make it work. And of course, in March of our first year, we hit the pandemic. And so that was another challenge for us.
Sure.
But we're still here.
Yep.
We're still here, still fighting.
Yeah, no, I like that, and it is really interesting that the point that you brought up about how you kind of have to be the seniors, because who they looking up to, right? And you kind of almost have to put on your player hat there and kind of think like, oh, what would a freshman player need to hear that they're not going to be able to hear from a upperclassman, and then kind of balancing all that. It is really interesting, but it's a unique opportunity for sure to kind of put your stamp on things, and definitely agree with what you said about the administrative work. The assistant coach has the best job in the world. They get to coach and do basketball. They get to do all the fun stuff, right?
Yes, they don't know it till they move up, but it's 100% true.
That's great. All right, Coach. Let's get into some positionless basketball. So let's start more on a maybe more of like a philosophical standpoint from your experience. Why is positionless basketball so important to you as a coach? Why are we kind of getting away from that traditional 1 through 5 sort of setup?
Yeah, awesome. So I think at times, if we're going philosophical, and you let me know if I'm rambling too much, Coach.
Go for it.
If we're going philosophical, I think at times positionless basketball can at times get a bad rep. It at times I think has a negative connotation with some coaches that and I'm not talking down on anybody, but I think that there's a connotation sometimes that by going positionless, it's kind of lazy. It's kind of like giving into the modern style of play, and that you don't know how to coach structure and fundamentals, so you're just rolling the balls out, letting them go to appease and try to recruit the best talent locally because you're a guy who just lets them go. And I think that it's actually really far from the truth. When it comes to positionless basketball, for me, I'm not so focused on we got to be positionless, we got to be positionless. My thing is more of I want to get as much skill on the court as possible. And I believe that in order for the system, your offensive system, to do that, you don't want to find the players in your program that best fit positions in your system, but rather made your system fit your players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to, well, our 2 or our 3 does this, or we need a 5 that does that, I just think it's a bit of backwards thinking. It's kind of counterproductive to what the ultimate goal is. From my point of view, being involved in the game at different levels with different age groups and on the guys and on the girls side, I'm a big believer that the game is much more skilled than it's ever been. I believe that players are actually smarter than they've ever been. And I think in a lot of ways that us coaches at times are still catching up to where they are taking the game. Now, there's certainly a trickle-down effect from what we see at the pro level and collegiate level, and it works its way down. And yeah, it's easy to be quote-unquote positionless if you have a LeBron or you have a Giannis or AD, and I understand that. So I completely can, I'm with you on that. But I think that there is still an element that we are a little bit behind at times when we are trying to put our players into these rigid roles. Why do we run an offense? We run an offense to score points. And what does it take to score points? It's a game of skill and a game of rhythm. So I want as much skill and rhythm as I can get on the offensive side of the floor while not completely bleeding out defensively at the same time. And so philosophically speaking, if you disagree with this, you let me know. But I think so most efficient shots, if we're going to list them, we're looking for uncontested at the rim. We're looking for free throws. We're looking for rhythm threes, and we're looking for mid-range in that order. I believe the mid-range still plays a big part in our game. I think a lot of defenses are forcing to give that up. And if you're a player that's skilled and can hit that shot, you're going to have ample opportunities throughout the season to take advantage of that. So I'm not an anti-mid-range guy by any means. I'm much more focused on having players play towards their strengths than that. But if we are to say that those are the most efficient shots in some capable order, I believe that the best way to create those shots comes down to 3 things. And this is a huge oversimplification, but sometimes that's what it takes for players to roll with you. If I'm talking, as long as I'm talking to you, my team stopped listening about 10 minutes ago. Right. So sometimes you got to be able to simplify these things. And I know that this is nothing groundbreaking, but it's helped me gather my offensive philosophy, and we've had success with it at different levels. But I think the 3 best ways to create those efficient shots are, in some capacity, you have to make 2 guard 1, right? Whether that's an on-ball attack or off-ball movement, I want to make 2 defenders guard 1 ball, or 2 defenders guard 1 person. Something's going to be open. We have some advantage somewhere. The second way to create an efficient shot is to have a significant matchup advantage, whether it's size, whether it's quickness, whether it's shooting, whatever it may be. But a significant matchup advantage is something you can just milk. And usually what that ends up being is there's a 2-on-1, right? Against a good defense, they're going to send some help. And the last thing is offensive rebounding. I think that if you're watching a game and you're watching the film and you look at any shot you would consider a good shot, you could in some way, shape, or form tie that shot back to one of those three things, which is not hard to do because they're broad categories, but hang with me. So for us, I believe the best way to create those type of opportunities, those type of shots, is to have players on the court who view their game not by position, but by skill. They view their game by their skill set and understanding that we want to help guide their instincts. Now, in a nutshell, what we're looking to do on the offensive end is that we want to force the defense into an impossible decision every chance we get. And that decision would be, are they going to help on the on-ball advantage, whatever it may be, and concede perimeter opportunities, or are they going to stay home on perimeter opportunities and concede the on-ball advantage? And as simple as that sounds, when we've discussed this with our players, we've seen better decision-making, better spacing concepts, better ball movement. And again, this stuff's, it's pretty obvious to coaches, but to players, sometimes by simplifying that and speaking in these very obvious terms, like we've seen light bulbs kind of go off and things click. What are your thoughts on that? How crazy am I?
Well, I'm curious because I'm tying this back to your program that you're in, and you mentioned about the program that you're creating right now, and you're kind of building, you said, is limited in terms of their skill set. So I'm curious, how does this philosophy sort of translate to that? Does it kind of fit like a glove, where because of the skill set, maybe it is a little bit more limited, that you're kind of, I don't want to say forced to be in a positionless basketball situation, but it just works the best that way?
Absolutely. Yeah, so great question. Where this goes, in regards to that, it's going to be understanding and helping players understand where their offensive skill set strengths are. What I mean by that is that, yes, we do not have a dominant guy that we can go to. We do not have a guy we would necessarily want to funnel things through. We just don't have an efficient playmaker that can consistently create good shots for us or for them on a consistent basis. And so, yes, there is an element of positionless and moving. But even with our travel program, which has more experienced guys and at the collegiate level with our girls, for us, we've had much more success when we have 5 players on the court that are somewhat compatible in what we consider our 6 essential skills. But to answer your question specifically, when the ball is moving, we need players that understand that with these 6 essential skills, they know where their niche is within it, that they need to be functional at all 6 of these to get on the court. Because we don't have any one player that may be considered great at creating and scoring, we all need to be consistent at these 6 fundamental things. Those 6 things are shooting off the catch. We talk about, sorry, I'm going through my notes here. Shooting off the catch and dribbling is number 2. And not everyone's going to have a dynamic handle, but we need everybody on the court to be efficient in getting from A to B. Number 3 is passing. And the way we discuss that with them is just reading a defense to find the open man and then having the ability to hit them on time and on target. Number 4 is defense, which is super broad, but what we had defined it as is understanding our defensive game plan and executing it consistently. And then the other 2 are really more of a mental aspect. And the 5th one is called mindset, which is just the ability to have a growth mindset, the ability to, how do you handle when things don't go your way? How do you handle when things do go your way? When you step into practice, when you step on the court, do you bring energy to the room or do you suck energy out? And the 6th and final one is effort. Do you control what you can control? And so we help each player in the early process of this. Even our freshmen, we go through with each one of them and we talk about these 6 things and we hear their feedback on where they think their strengths are and where they have confidence and lack confidence. And then we give them our take on it. And we use that to kind of guide our skill development. And we use that to guide when a kid is wondering, why he's not playing on the ball more, perhaps to at least start the transition break. Well, here's the reasons why. Here's how you can play to your strengths and help us be competitive today. And yet here's where our weaknesses are, so we know what to work on for tomorrow. I'm kind of spewing a lot at you. Is that
and like so with that, it sounds like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the on paper, or let's say you go in the gym and you see, you have a few just like, lights out shooters. Let's just say for the sake of this exercise, you have some lights out shooters and some people who can pass, pretty well, but maybe you have, a couple other players who, they're not great shooters, but maybe like their defense or, their mindset and effort is at a certain level. It seems like you're kind of putting in the 5 that are gonna make this work, and it might not necessarily be, your I don't want to say your best players, but maybe your best like individual skill set, but it needs to be a certain combination of 5 players that can check off all the boxes, at least collectively check off all those boxes as best as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've tried to do is give clarity. We try to give clarity in what helps you earn playing time. And that's why, I mean, those 6 essential skills are super broad. But what it does is, and we discussed this from the very first parent meeting with everybody in the room, players included, we're saying for players that get on the court, here's the 6 skill. Like, coach, what should I work on my game? Well, let's look at our 6. Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Right. And it kind of serves as, now there's a million different roads to go through in the middle after that, but it gives you a starting point. And with our players, especially our younger ones, we've found that it helps to give them the clarity and the starting point of what's going on in our head. Coach isn't trying to get positions on the court. We're trying to get skill on the court. It's a game of skill. And so don't worry about what position you think you are. Let's look at your skill set and how it can help a team be competitive. And for us, now, in order for this to work, the downside, right? The downside of this deal, there has to be a level of basketball IQ and feel.
Yep. Yes. Absolutely.
This philosophy, as flawed as it may be, this philosophy is betting on human nature. And what I mean by that is that human nature does not like to look bad. Human nature does not want to be embarrassed, especially on a Friday night in a packed gym. If we as coaches can guide our players to what their strengths are and be real and be honest about what our weaknesses are, not to hide from them, but to work upon them, improve on them, and understand our limitations, it's been our experience that we've understood and have seen players play towards their strengths, which at the end of the day is why we put in a system. If we go to a classic traditional, albeit rigid system where positions 1 through 5 have certain roles and certain freedoms, we're doing that because we're trying to put players in their strengths, right? We're doing that because we believe it's what's best for our team. With this philosophy, you're achieving that same goal. You're going about it a different way. It is a lengthier process. It's going to be ugly early, even with skilled players, because as we know, just like coaches who have we all have weaknesses. We don't always have self-awareness of those weaknesses. We always don't have great self-awareness about what we do well and where we struggle. And so that's where your relationship with these guys and with your players is important. It's everything, because if you can be honest with them and raw and upfront with them, and they know that you're coming from the heart because you believe this is what's in their best interest, and you're showing them on film, here's where we struggle and here's where we do really well. Let's emphasize and encourage what we do well, and let's work on where we struggle. That philosophy, it takes time. It takes time. But the reason why I believe it's worth it is that I believe there's much bigger upside when you have players playing free, filled with confidence, and willing to take some risks.
Well, you brought up
players. Go ahead. Sorry.
I say that you brought up a really good point with this about like the idea that it is a long road, and that if you want to do positionless basketball, that means your players need to be at some level comfortable in multiple different areas of the court. Whereas in a more traditional offense, and it's not slandering anybody, but in a more traditional offense, there's less thinking probably involved, where players just have to have certain actions down and make sure they do those actions. Maybe there's a couple counters, but do those actions really well. But they're not going to deviate too much from the script. But in a positionless basketball system, you might be going, from the wing to the block and going from one side to the other. And you brought up the idea, like, these players have to know what they're doing, and that requires them to be taught basketball, and they need to actually understand the processes of things. And like you mentioned, that's a long road. And so I'm imagining, and I'll let you speak to it, but I'm imagining that has to be built in and ingrained in a program that wants to do positionless basketball, is actually teaching your kids, well, in a way, how to play basketball and almost kind of see things the way that a coach would see it.
Yes, it's exactly. It's a lot of communicating. It's a lot of watching film together. It's a lot about owning up your own mistakes when your rotations aren't there. You have to be real with them, and you have to say, here's where we could have done better, where I could have done better. Here's why. Where we've had success with it is having players think more of their skill sets rather than positions. So we try to get them to start thinking about offensive player types. And we've done four very simple things, and as simple as they sound, they've helped guys have their identity. I think a lot of coaches, when they hear positionless, they start to get night terrors and sweating, thinking about their five shooting 30-footers and breaking the press consistently. With positionless, I believe that there's a hybrid form that works for you, whatever your team's personnel is, whatever your strengths are. That might be a numbered break, but once it flows into the half court, all 5 spots are interchangeable in some form or some capacity. There's some hybrid form of it where you're putting more of an emphasis on fundamentals, skills, principles, and habits than you are on structured system. I also just find it, and maybe it's just a flaw of mine as a coach, but I find that players are much more willing to buy into a system that's there to teach them and challenge them and provide them with a feel about where their strengths are, but from a perspective of belief and confidence in them, of rather emphasizing of what they can do, rather than a very rigid structure of here's all the things you can't do because you play that position. I think, I don't know if I worded that well.
So, yeah.
But,
Well, if you have positions, right, your traditional 1 through 5, there are certain expectations that if you are a 1, you don't do this. If you're a 2, 3, 4, 5, you don't do this. And you have to learn what you aren't going to do as much as what you're supposed to do in that position. I think kind of summarizes that.
Yeah. Well said. And just from a defensive perspective, anything you're lacking on those 6 essential skills, especially shooting, my job just becomes much, much easier on how to scout you and how to prepare for you. Our players' lives become much easier because we went back to talking about forcing that defense to make a choice. Do they concede the on-ball advantage, or do they stay home on perimeter shooting, or vice versa? Well, every guy on the floor that isn't a willing shooter to some capacity, maybe not a volume shooter, but a willing shooter, there's no consequence, right? There's no consequence. And so I believe that, not everybody can be a phenomenal elite shooter. Certainly not. That's a special talent and ability along with a lot of hard work. But I believe that with reps and confidence and time and an understanding of rhythm, that players can become competent shooters if they're willing to put in the time. And for us, we talk a lot about, with certain teams we've coached in the past, we talk a lot about when it gets to positionless and we're moving around the court in the half court scenario. Some teams we've had in the past have had a strength of being on ball, and we could rely on a lot more of just spacing concepts. We had guys that could create, draw 2, make good decisions, and we just play off of that.
Yeah.
Other rosters we've had, we had a lot of smart and solid players, but weren't gifted on ball. We had a lot of more off ball principles and habits that we would just play. But again, any of the 5 positions could be in any of those scenarios off ball. The example we like to use with our guys, we pull a lot of clips of just the pro game to show them. But the example we always use of kind of finding our spacing to movement ratio is Steph, KD, Golden State, and Harden, Houston. With Houston, 2 very prolific offenses, 2 of the best offenses we've ever seen on paper, at least. Mm-hmm. Obviously, not everyone loves the way that Harden and Houston plays, but the numbers were pretty good. With Houston, obviously, great on-ball players. They would space some players and just let those guys create. That was kind of their on-ball. That was their identity. With Golden State, if you're just spacing certain guys on their roster, they're not going to get a lot of respect. So they needed more off-ball motion, more off-ball movement. Even though they had 2 of the best shooters we've ever seen on the same team, they needed more off-ball movement to free up good looks for them. So every team kind of has that spacing movement ratio. And with those 2 teams competing against each other often over the years, and a lot of film being available and our kids connecting to those players, it has helped us kind of find, for this roster, what's our ideal spacing versus movement ratio. But having that understanding, for me as a player, one of the biggest reasons as a coach, I'm geared towards positionless and more about habits and principles than I am rigid structure and rigid positioning, is the systems that I played in. Mm-hmm. My high school coach ran like classic Bobby Knight motion, that once we got into the half court, we had 5 interchangeable pieces. We never really ever set a ball screen, but we did a ton of screening and cutting. Everybody had to be at least willing to shoot, willing to drive and kick, had to have some level of functionality. And the reason he had us play that way was that we didn't have any elite talent. And so if we were going to compete and play with the big boys out there, so to speak, we had to have 5 players on the court that were competent and were solid at everything. That was our upside, And at college, our coach ran a little bit more of a lot more on-ball spacing concept. So we ran a 4-out 1-in motion that was largely interchangeable after the very first transition ball screen. So totally 2 different ways of attacking it, but outside of the numbered break, it was 100% positionless once we flowed into our offense. And it relied on 5 players on the court being willing to shoot, being willing to attack and pass. And so that's obviously heavily influenced me as a coach, where I saw some of our teams that were hardworking but limited on talent beat some teams and have some success that we probably shouldn't have had, just because we had 5 players that were playing towards the strengths of their skill set rather than trying to meld and mesh into a position that they had to figure out.
How does a team that's looking to get into this sort of to go away from the traditional set and go into this more free flow, positionless basketball, how do these players get into a position where they're just sort of like able to play? I imagine as a coach, you're just kind of holding your breath in a positionless system where like, all right, the ball's past half court, and in a sense, like you don't really know what's going to happen. They're just gonna make their decisions, and they're gonna go and play to their skill set. So as a coach, how do you kind of build that where your players know how to play off of one another and know how to like read the defense correctly and make the right play?
Yeah, absolutely. It all sounds good until you see it on the court, right?
That's my thought. I'm like,
when I'm drawing this on the ball, I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. You see, first practice, you're like, what have I done? Yeah, great question, man. Great question. So here's the deal. The end result of any offensive system is to put points on the board, and we do that by getting players to play towards their strengths. Mm-hmm. The challenge with positionless, as a coach, there's an element where you have to let go a little bit, right? That's why it's a longer process, like we've discussed. You have to have an ability to let go a little bit. Not easy to do. Coaches are really good at talking a lot, and they're really good at telling people what to do.
Yep.
So it's a challenge. It absolutely is a challenge. Why I believe the challenge is worth it is that empowered players make more plays. For me, I've played for coaches that personally that And don't get me wrong, I had to work really, really hard to be an average player. So I'm not trying to stretch any limit of the imagination here. But for me and for teammates and for kids I've coached, I've seen guys feel bottled up and be a shell of themselves. And 6 months later in a different system or a different environment, be a total different guy because of a little empowerment to make their decisions.
Yeah.
So what we do is every player wants to hear freedom, right? They want to hear, that's like, they love it. That's exciting, but it's dangerous. So we tell them, with that freedom comes a lot of responsibility to, like you're saying, make the right play, make the right decision. How do we get them to do that? So we tell them that we want them to, we don't want to spoon feed you. We don't want to spoon feed you offense. We want you to know how to hunt. We want you to be able to feed yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be spoon fed as a player. You want to learn how to hunt and then take care of business on your own. So the challenge is not so much the basketball IQ. It's usually the lack of self-awareness of who they are as a player and where their strengths really, where they really rely.
And those could be some tough conversations.
They are. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
they absolutely are. There are feelings involved.
Sure.
But I mean, I've listened to your podcast and you've done a great job. Your platform is great. And just what you got, a lot of your great coaches that you had on have talked about is just, the basic idea of that if your players don't believe that you care about them, they don't care what you have to say, right? A lot of your great coaches have covered that and they're 100% right. So if you don't have the relationship aspect, this is going to be really tough. If you're not willing to have those honest conversations, and they don't need to be demeaning. They don't need to be negative. You don't need to be the biggest jerk in the room or anything. It's just because you care, because you've studied and put in the time on their game and are trying to figure out how they can be the best them. We're going to have an honest conversation. How do we do that where we're not getting kids to hate us, right? Mm-hmm. So this is where the little document we talked about are offensive player types.
Yeah.
Now this is where, as a coach, I'm cheating, right? I'm positionless, but here we have player types. Where we try to get guys to understand is we've broken them down into 4 things, very broad, but we say, okay, there's on-ball perimeter players, there's off-ball perimeter players, there's on-ball bigs, and there's off-ball bigs. And what gets guys to kind of understand, like, that's where your strengths are. Mm-hmm. We use just simple connections to NBA guys, guys they like and watch. And like for on-ball guys, we use examples like Steph or Dame or James Harden or Luka or Trae Young, guys that are the motor of an offense. You can put the ball in their hands with space, and they're going to have an ability to either break their man down and force help or to break their man down and score, and they can do it consistently. On-ball perimeter guy. Off-ball perimeter guy, examples we like to use are guys like Clay, guys like Redick, Duncan Robinson, Joe Harris, can space the floor, generally aren't going to create the offense, but they're a lot of the times they finish the offense, whether it's off a kick out, off a cut, etc. On-ball bigs, we like to talk about Embiid. We use Anthony Davis. We use Jokic, guys that play out of different positions on the court, different spots on the floor, but can be a full-on motor for your team. Yeah. Off-ball bigs, right? Clint Capella, Jared Allen types, DeAndre Jordan, Mitchell Robinson types. But by kind of putting it in that nutshell and showing them clips of these types of players, of here's where you can be successful. You have to be able to be functional at those 6 essential skills, but here's where your strengths lie. What that does, and we discuss that with them on an individual scale as well as in front of everybody. And what that does is we come at it from an approach of not here's what you can't do, but here's what you can do. Here's where you bring value to the team. Every day you step on the court ready to compete and believe in yourself the way we believe in you. And it's not, we're not like BSing them. We're telling them like, here's where your strengths are, man. Here's how you can help. And so hearing it from that format, it takes away some of the initial harsh reaction of, a guy thinking he's Steph and then he's Clint Capella. But what it does is when we have those open conversations, honest conversations, it helps guys realize where their strengths are and more importantly, where their teammates' strengths are. So when we are positionless and you have a chance to set a down screen or a flare screen, I should probably down screen for this guy who's a better shooter than me. And then I can dive or I can slip or reject it and then look to fill, and guys from even our young guys, they're coming around to it. We got a long way to go.
Well, yeah, they're coming around to it. This isn't game one necessarily. For sure.
No.
Or game 100 sometimes.
No, but it's something that when you have those conversations and you give them little clips and you're showing them, it helps guys show here's where your strengths are. And naturally, once guys buy in and they learn and they see the light on where their strengths are, they, in our experience, play towards them. Back to human nature, they don't want to look bad. And if this is what they can do to help their team and help themselves have success and look good, so to speak, they slide towards that. That's what's been our experience. Now, one thing you have to do is you have to commit and practice to a lot of instruction through live experiences. So you asked the question of how do you help them to make the right decision in a free-flowing concept offense, right? We did ask that, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And if I didn't, I'm asking it now.
Okay, awesome. No, I'm sure you did that. You have to put them in live experience situations often, and you have to let them fail and fail and fail and practice, and then show them and teach them how and why their failing is happening, and to teach them to continue to be aggressive throughout it.
Yeah.
And you're going to show them through. If you're one of the coaches that film practices, it's great because you can pull clips from that directly. What helps us a lot is pulling clips from when guys at the highest of levels are making mistakes and showing them that, see, he misread this situation. He misread the tag on the roller here, and that's why the pass was off target. Or he missed this opportunity here. And when they see, hey, the best players in the world are learning what I'm learning, you get more buy-in on it in terms of their willingness to listen and to go all in with you. For them, it's an easy sell because they're not so bogged down. And for you as a coach, you can get some sleep at night because there is an element of structure, although it is positionless, towards playing to their strengths.
Yeah. And I think I just want to really hammer that point home, because this is kind of the from the philosophical question I asked earlier, where people stereotypically, I think of positionless basketball as just like chaotic, just free form, everybody's everywhere. But really what it is you're naturally, and you brought this up, you're playing to some strength that you already have and strengths that you already bring. And so while you're not fitting in a 1 through 5 position, you are better suited in certain areas, and your skill set is going to be maximized in certain areas, and you can still grow in some of the others. But in a way, again, it's not that they naturally go to positions, but they go into places on the court more often where their skill set is going to be the most beneficial. But I'll let you clarify that if I didn't get that right.
No, you did a great job. Yes. I believe that at the highest level of competition, whatever level you're playing at, as you're getting deeper and deeper into the season and you're playing better teams, what you want to do is going to be taken away at some shape or form. And so you need players to make plays, right? At the end of the day, we don't want positions on the court. I want basketball players. I want basketball players that can read a defense, see what the defense is doing, and then counter that. And that takes time. That takes film. That takes harsh conversations. But as long as it's coming from your heart about, like, here's where we can help you, not, hey, don't ever do that again. It's beneficial, and there's a lot of upside. And so for me, with my teams, understanding the weakness of myself as a coach and understanding the downside of our system, I'm gonna have some bad possessions where we're gonna take a rush shot, where I got a guy feeling himself a little bit and he's gonna make the wrong choice. He's gonna take a 30-footer in transition because he just hit one, and there are possessions like that. But as the season goes on, they become less and less and less if, as a team and a family, we're doing our job of holding ourselves accountable and teaching.
And you also, real quick before I forget, you also need to create a team culture where, like, your players are willing to, like, forgive one another for that and own up to when they made those mistakes, because those things are going to happen where, they get locked in, or they get that tunnel vision, or they see something that maybe wasn't there, but they thought was. So your team also has to be sort of forgiving. One, people have to apologize to one another, and two, they have to be willing to forgive one another and kind of build that trust that like, hey, I made this mistake, but I own it, and this is what we'll do better next time. You got to really create that sort of culture as well if your program.
Totally. And it starts with yourself as the coach, showing on film when maybe you subbed a guy out too early who was in a rhythm and you were too strict on your rotation, whatever the case may be. But by owning your mistakes, it goes a long way because you're saying, hey, look, we're all in it together. I'm making mistakes every single day. What we ask is that not a single mistake. We give them two promises. The first one is that we're going to make mistakes. And the second promise is that no mistake will ever be due to a lack of effort on our part or a lack of love for our team. We ask those same two promises for our players. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen, but don't let one be for lack of effort or lack of love. And so by us holding ourselves to the same standard, it goes a long way with buying credibility and just building a relationship. Yeah. But the reason why you go through the headaches of some of the shot selection and decision-making, I just believe I'd always rather go for the gusto. I'd rather go big and have the chance of upside of having players on the court who believe in themselves, who are playing free, it's a game of rhythm, and it's really hard to play to the best. I don't think you can get a player's A game in a rigid system. I think you get their B+ game 9 times out of 10, which is better in the long run, right? A lot of teams can win that way. But in my experience, it's really hard to get a guy's or a girl's A game if they don't feel a lot of confidence and belief in themselves and an understanding of where their strengths lie and that their coach and their team has their back. So to me, there's going to be games where we shoot poorly, where we really launch it from 3, and I have to own those. You know what I'm saying? I have to own those. But if we don't have the elite talent to beat the best guys out there, we got to go big. We got to have our A game to have a chance, right? And then find a way to get you to play your B game. So to me, it's a better chance to develop players by getting them to learn to hunt for themselves rather than be spoon-fed. So for our guys that are travel ball or high school that are going to the next level, or our college guys that are looking to play at the next level, we're putting them in a better position by developing them.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And yes, there's going to be some downside to that for me in the immediacy. I think that's a word, in the immediate time. But I believe the risk is worth the reward, and that we're going to have some great days that we never could have had. And if they're in the right time and the right moment, could be season changing.
Well, you kind of go through, I think, as a coach, when you try to go through some level of positionless basketball where you have those growing pains, but they're learning the game of basketball and can actually have conversations with you about things that they're seeing on the court and the decisions that they made, where not in all cases, but there are certain cases where if you have a system, players can do really well and be successful at the system, but in some cases they might not even know why they're being successful, or like they're just going through what they're going through and they can't even really have a conversation with you about anything else. That's like on the extreme end, but I know it does happen. So I think one of the cool things about positionless basketball is just the level of conversations you can probably have with your guys or girls once they understand sort of everything that's happening on the court and where their place is on it.
Absolutely. And another aspect of the upside of, I believe, teaching players to hunt instead of spoon feeding them is game to game matchups change, right? You can make adjustments, but probably best to stay to the core of who you are, right? That being said, it's much easier when you have a team built this way to pivot one game to the next with more on-ball principles or off-ball principles. If you don't have the on-ball matchup, significant matchup advantage, understanding that, hey guys, today we need a lot more movement. We got to get more off-ball screens. Let's get some staggers. Let's get some pin downs. Let's read those and see what we got. Where other games, you might have 2 or 3 matchups on the floor that you love, and it's time to get the ball to that player in space and let's eat. So being able to pivot that stuff is really what we're doing. Is it lazy coaching? Maybe I'm lazy, but what it's doing is,
before I forget this thought real quickly, what this does too, because I want you to speak on this specifically. I think what this does is allows you to just more so focus on what you're trying to accomplish on the offensive end rather than the idea of like, okay, they're in this defense, so we have to act this certain way or do this certain action. It really seems to be focused on like, okay, like here's kind of where we're at. Let's just focus on what we want to do on the offensive end and just, like you said, just kind of say a few quick things and just sort of, like you said, let them hunt rather than necessarily having to go through a lot of like breaking down what the other team is trying to do on defense. You can kind of focus more on what you want your guys to do on offense in a few quick terms.
Absolutely. And I think that in the end, we are making, yes, the same adjustment is there.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise basketball IQ, basketball feel, and basketball IQ. And I think we could all agree, whether you're a big positionless guy or not, that teams with high basketball IQs that can read a defense and are skilled can be really hard to beat. And that's the end game here. For example, an adjustment, let's say defensively, let's say they're pressuring hard off ball. All right, they're denying one pass away. We would put more of an emphasis on screening, slipping, back cutting, etc. In the same game, or let's say next game, this team's gapping, right? Maybe a bit of a pack line. There's more of an emphasis on screening them in. We know we're not going to get as many back cuts. We're not going to get as many driving lanes. We're not going to get as many slips, but we can change the angle of our screens and screen them in. And we know those are the kind of shots that are going to be available. So by being a little bit more positionless, where you're more focused on concepts and principles and habits, it's easier to adjust those concepts and habits because you've been doing it all year based on the matchup. And you're still playing towards your strengths and you're not changing who you are, but you're saying, here's what the defense is giving us. Here's how we can attack it, right? Every defense gives up something. The best defenses just choose and they commit to what they're going to give up. And then they live with it. They believe the good outweighs the bad, right?
Yep.
So we're saying, here's what they're giving up. Here's how we can attack it. Well, I can only do that if I got 4 or 5 players on the floor that are willing to shoot, handle, and pass the ball. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot more freedom there. And so that's the upside of this. It does take more time. There is a lot more communication. It's not something I can just write up on a board and say, hey, we're running this offense and this is the way it is. Let's go. If you want to play, we got to do this. That team's going to look a lot better earlier. No question. Like that team's going to look structured and they're going to have role definition quick. Our system's going to take more time, but I believe, and from what we've seen, there's more upside in our system. I also think that it's getting more and more rare, and this is not a discredit to the youth of today. This is not a knock to basketball players at all. Again, like we've said, I think that they're smarter and more skilled than ever before. I also think they're much more reluctant to be put into a box. Now, do they always have great self-awareness? No, but I think more and more players are a little bit more versatile. They definitely think they're more versatile. And,
sure.
But I believe that your ability to connect and build a system where they're going to be productive is going to come a lot easier if you're not so rigid with you need to mesh into this, mold into that. It's more of let's see what you guys can do. We're good at these things. Let's go all in on those things.
Well, when you're talking about the adjustments or the things that you need to like emphasize against a particular team that you're playing, something that you know that, okay, against this team we need to do this, that, or the other. What you're really doing is you're kind of just mentioning about certain skills that you're going to have to like emphasize more. And if you're focusing more on your players' skill sets rather than positions, that's kind of like a natural conversation to have because you talked about those essential, the 6 essential characteristics. And, if you're like, well, okay, we really got to focus on, X and Y. Well, they've been hearing that language about those particular skills. And so it's really easy. They've been having those conversations with you for all year and longer, probably.
There's clarity.
Mm-hmm.
There's clarity, right? So I know those things, like the documents I sent you. I was almost embarrassed to send them to you.
No, great.
This stuff is so simple, but there's clarity in the simplicity, and there's a lot of ideology behind the simplicity, but you can't give all that to them, right? They likely don't want to hear it. And so, but in the simplicity, there can be a lot of production. And so by having that clarity and understanding player types, strengths, 6 essential skills, having an understanding of that, what we're looking for. There's also something to be said, especially like with a high school program, or really even more at the collegiate level, where you only have one level of play, right? I can't put a kid on the freshman team. Like, I got a good freshman we want to develop. She's a stud, but right now we got a junior senior over her, 2 All-Americans, and she's struggling to get playing time.
Yeah.
By having this clarity of skill and essentials, when she's coming to me and she's saying, Coach, how come I'm not playing? I don't need to give her coach speak. I don't need to pump her up or to bring her down or be too overly negative. We can literally just go to the clarity of, let's look at your skill set. Here's what our team needs right now. We're lacking this on the floor. Players A and B, well, they're giving it to us right now. And you know what? Me and you, we're getting together earlier, after practice, and let's start working on these weaknesses, because that's what's going to open your role up for next season. Like, it gives us clarity. And we have a lot of kids, and I'm sure yours is the same way, that have a great work ethic, that are willing to put in the time and want to work hard. There's immense pressure on a coach that when you have kids that have passion for the game, you want to direct that passion. Like, if they're in an efficient way that matters to them, right? If they're going to spend hours every week in the gym, like, you're as happy as can be, but you want to guide that passion. You want to make sure, dude, this she's killing it. She's in the gym every day. We can't kick her out. I want to make sure her time is worth something. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so by having those player profiles, by having those offensive skill sets and everything broken down, it can kind of guide those workouts on how to get better. By also doing this,
well, I was thinking real quick too, before I forget, that one of the things that can do, especially for a high school program in particular, is that if you have guys on your bench that are working really hard and they want to get playing time, you don't necessarily pigeonhole them where, like, okay, you're the 6'6" guy, so the only person you're ever going to go in for is this person on this specific occasion. It's rather, well, here's the skill set, and when there's this sort of void on the court, then or we need something, like, if you have that skill set, then you're going to be the one who gets to go in. I remember a coach once said that when I sub players on the court, it's because there's a problem on the court that needs to be solving. So when I look to my bench, I need to look and see who is going to solve that problem. And I always stuck with me, and that's almost in positionless basketball. It almost seems like that kind of goes hand in hand.
That's an interesting point for sure. Let me ask you this, Coach.
Sure.
Players coming into your program, and if you're an elite level program, for sure there's differences. But let me ask you this: for the majority of us coaches, how many players do we get coming into our gym doors that are either dominant bigs or dominant on-ball players that are just going to be a nightmare matchup for the majority of our games?
I'll let you know when I find one.
Okay. I'm with you. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm with you. So
real quick, I do love my girls, so they're awesome.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Of
Go
course,
ahead. I better make sure I get that in there.
No, wait. That goes without saying. But good to say it still. Good catch. Now let me ask you, how many players come through your door that we have the chance, between their work ethic, their passion, their capability, and your experience and your knowledge, that we can turn into a functional catch and shoot player, a functional handle, and a functional ability to read that person helped, there's the open man.
If you are a competent coach, you better believe that all of your players will be able to learn that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm with you. So then it would make sense that to me, if those are the majority players that are going to be in your program, you want the most skilled and competent players on the floor, rather than being so rigid to a positional system. Now, you might have a great big or an athletic player, and you're like, look, we got to get her inside, and let's go 4 out, 1 in. Great, no problem. Like that's a bit of where, if the 4 on the perimeter are truly interchangeable, that's a bit of a hybrid system, right? And I know that's, we're kind of like nitpicking there.
Yeah, you can get in the weeds a little bit, but no, I get what you mean.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, on the perimeter, once it's in the half court, and if your big if she can shoot it, well, she might pick and pop, and next thing you know, we're in 5 out. You know what I'm saying? And we're flowing from those things. So it doesn't mean that you need to be crazy with the positionless. It's just that most of our players are not going to be dominant bigs. I mean, how many dominant bigs are out there, period?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
you're better off having 5 players on the court that are willing and functional to knock one down, willing and functional to get a driving kick, that understand how to. So to me, that's where the upside is that we might be able to beat some of these teams that on paper have more talent because they got to truly guard all 5 of us in some capacity. And it doesn't mean our shot selection is going to be completely even across the board. Like there's always some hierarchy that naturally develops. But in understanding, I just think that there's more upside there where if we play a traditional system against a more talented team, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the leg, so to speak.
Well, and then in that more, traditional, system, whatever that offense is, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. It's a lot. It's really easy to get film on you at that point. It's really easy to kind of get film on you and see your action and see what you're doing. And I think any good coach will try to disrupt whatever that offense is and see what your counters is and what happens when that gets disrupted. And as a coach, I feel like if you feel like you're constantly have to go to the clipboard and constantly have to sort of try and play this chess match with the other coach rather than have your players play, I think that slows your team down and that just sort of naturally handcuffs them.
Yeah, absolutely. At some point in the game, your stuff's going to get taken away and players have to make plays. And if they haven't had to hunt and they've been spoon-fed only, it's really hard. It's really hard. But it's just an ideology behind it. To me, I'd rather go big. I'd rather go with the upside and I'll take the lumps early and be patient. It also keeps me sharp and our coaching staff sharp as coaches because we don't ever say, here's our system. We're going to get really good at running it. And as coaches, it's so easy to get into that rut because, I mean, like, look how hard you work to build this platform and to run your program for your girls. We've spent a lot of time researching and studying and listening and going to clinics this is the system. This is the perfect system for us. I know it. And so it's hard. We get attached, right? But if we're constantly with a positionless system where it's like, we just need to get skill on the court and teach them to play basketball. Let's teach them concepts and how to read. We can't ever get lazy because we have to stay with where the game is going. And we are constantly teaching concepts. It makes us better with in-game adjustments because we're constantly under fire with in-game adjustments, right? Like we're teaching those on the fly in practice in scrimmages, postseason. So to me, there's a big advantage from a coaching perspective as well, where it keeps you sharp, where you're not saying we're just running this system. It's, well, hold on, we're playing basketball. What are they doing? Okay, how can we counter that? Let's do this. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, and figure out where the game's going, and you got to stay on top of trends and what things are happening and where things are going, and keeps you in a way. I think it also, as a coach, I think it just sort of keeps you relevant, for a lack of a better term. I think it's really easy, and because I'm a teacher and I've seen that too. I think it's really easy to I guess get outdated as a coach, and it's really easy to just sort of rest on your laurels or rest on what you're comfortable in, and next thing you know, like you're the dinosaur in the room hasn't adapted in X amount of years. But things change and basketball changes, and if I tried to coach like it was 1985, I probably would be in trouble. And again, that's just me kind of going on my own tangent. But I think as a coach, it's important for you to, I don't know, if you care about the profession, right, and you care about growing as a coach, you got to stay up to date and relevant about what's going on and hopefully adapt in some way.
We like to think so, right?
Yeah.
We like to think so.
We'd like to. That's
let
true.
me ask you a quick question, Coach. I know we're getting close on time, but let me ask you a
Sure.
quick question. Do you think that do you believe that it's harder today to get players to buy into a rigid positional system than it was 10 years ago?
I think so. I think it's difficult to get players to buy in because I don't think in the NBA, or they're not seeing that. I don't think they necessarily see traditional positions in the NBA. So I think if you ask some guys and some players, about traditional like small forwards or shooting guards or the 1-through-5s. I think some high schoolers would really struggle to identify who those are, because if they watch an NBA game, they just see players playing. They see players out there, you know, all over the place. So I think it is. I think it's difficult to kind of confine them when they don't necessarily see it, even at the professional level.
Yeah, that's a great point you made. I think so I mean, with your point, it's almost like as coaches, we sort of have to pivot with them, not get away from teaching. If anything, I think with positionless basketball, you do a lot more teaching. It's not, okay, I'm going to swallow my whistle and we're rolling the balls out. Here we go. Let me just go grab guys that are talented and here, let's just hope for it's the opposite. I think it's constant teaching, constant. And it's evolving the game, I believe, for the better. There's definitely certain elements that of the game that we could be in danger of losing, which would be a shame, no doubt about that. But I think that one of the challenges is that these kids have never been so immersed in the game, and yet maybe have had less of instruction. They're getting a ton of, like a lot of our guys, from what I've seen, watch a lot of highlights, but don't watch a lot of game. So I don't know if that's the same for you, but
no, it's the same. Instagram highlights, those are real.
Right, exactly. And there's so many great, I mean, they're fun to watch. There's so many ways that you can, and they're constantly coming at you, right, on your social and everything else. So I get it. And so we can't run a 45-hour long film session with guys. I'll have guys sleeping. So what we do is we run very short and to the point ones, or honestly, even utilizing our group chat with just quick videos we're putting together where we're slowing down 1 or 2 clips that are teaching a concept of, here's habits that we can copy. Here's habits that we can work on. And you're showing them being done by the best women players in the game, the best male players in the game. And just like having them see that, of how these guys are successful doing it, and you can work on that today in practice. We've had success with that type of film study more than we have like, all right, today we're watching an hour on ball screens, get cozy, here we go. Like I'd have 8 transfers before I press play. But the ability to kind of meet with them, you know, it's a very, I mean, the kids have gone through a lot, obviously, and they're adapting, but they're used to having a lot of creative freedom and versatility throughout their day, from their forms of entertainment to when they watch it and everything else. And I think that's how we are adjusting as coaches. But I don't believe, and I understand the challenges of that for sure. And I understand the downside of my philosophy on it. I have the losses to prove it. But what I'm saying is I don't believe it's all bad. I don't. I think there's a lot of beauty in where the game is going. And by empowering these players and teaching them how to read and how to fend for themselves out there, so to speak, there's a lot of upside. And I think the game is going to continue to evolve in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I really like the positive outlook on it, because I'm with you too. I think that there's a lot of really good things going on, and like you mentioned before, there just needs to be just that level of teaching that takes place, and once those go together, I think we're going to see some really cool basketball happen. Definitely, I 100% agree with that. That was actually a really nice way to kind of end off, but I don't end off on that, because there's always a couple of questions I ask coaches as part of this concluding segment. So, Coach, what is a coaching moment of yours? From any point of your career, whether it involves positionless basketball or wherever, what is a coaching moment of yours that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Oh man, a coaching moment. Great moment for me was really our first season at Castake, where we preach a lot about reaching our potential on and off the court. And that if that is our goal, if that is our focus, the wins will come with it. As whatever wins we're capable of, they give us our best chance. And we talk a lot about it's bigger than basketball. We talk a lot about developing people and not just developing players.
Yeah.
You know, one day they'll stop being a player, but they are forever a person. And to develop one and not the other is a mistake. And all these things, I mean, again, I enjoy your podcast, and a lot of great leaders, yourself included, have addressed these things. But to really live in that moment where we're not getting a lot of wins, we're getting beat up, and all the material success that we desire as players and coaches aren't coming. Can you still show up to practice that day with a full practice plan, ready to go, and energy and positivity and accountability and enthusiasm? Can you still bring juice to practice for your guys when you're getting beat up pretty badly?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that what helped me to do that, outside of just my love for the game and my love for them, was getting to know my players on a relational level, where understanding and just before and after practice, talking to them or texting them just how things are going and learning about what's going on in their life. And you're really connecting with the person, not just the player, right? Which is obvious. And I don't mean to drown on about it, but
Oh, no.
what it helped me to do was to, okay, I say I'm about these things. It's time to really be about these things. Can I still bring that energy? Can I still prep and scout this team, even though I know we might get 30 ball tomorrow? Am I still going to prep? Am I still going to show them that it's bigger than the scoreboard, like I say?
Mm-hmm.
And what helped me to do that was getting to know them, who they are off the court, and things that are going well, things that are struggling with, things at home. Just taking the time to really get to know them and build that family-like relationship and culture. It gave me the perspective of it is bigger than basketball. We are here for a greater purpose. And so I would just say what a great teaching moment for me was when all the material success was stripped away, and it was time to really be about it and not just talk about it or post about it.
Yeah. And if you're still loving it and enjoying yourself and really enjoying the connections you make with your players, when things are rough on the scoreboard, then it's just that much different when things do pick up and when things are going well. But yeah, like you said, if you strip away all the on-court success and you're just left with you and the players that you're working with, and you still love it because you love working with them, I mean, there's nothing better as far as I'm concerned. That there's nothing better than that. That's really great and a really good reminder, because I know we talk a lot just about X's and O's and about trying to be as successful as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, if you're building those relationships and the people in your program are better people than they were before they entered your program, then to me, that's a success as well. That's a huge success. That's
Totally, Coach. Totally.
And to wrap up, Coach, give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox. Feel free to go longer. I'm not starting the timer on you. It's your floor to get out any last idea, a closing thought, a closing message, just something to leave the listeners with. So I'm going to go ahead and give that floor to you, Coach, and you can take it away.
Oh, thanks, Coach. I appreciate that.
No pressure.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. Look, positionless basketball, why I'm passionate about it, why I believe it is the future of the game. And I believe that empowered and educated players produce. If your players are empowered and they are educated, they will produce. At the end of the day, we create an offensive system. We create an on-court identity because we believe it puts the kids in our program in the best chance to win and be competitive. I think that as a coach, because we put in so much time and energy and effort, one of the hardest things to do is to let go of those reins a little bit. We know that we've watched countless more hours of film and spent a lot more time and have read a lot more and have listened to greater minds than our players. We've just done it longer. And so it's hard to relinquish some of that control. And I don't think that's a negative thing for a coach. I just think it shows a coach cares. They believe that they truly know best and they care. Their heart's in the right place. But I would just suggest, if at any capacity it's within you, to let go a little bit, not with your effort, not with your teaching. You're going to actually need to teach more, and you're going to need to educate more consistently and constantly. But I believe that you'll find that empowered and educated players produce. And if you can find the courage to give it a shot, I think you'll enjoy the process. They'll enjoy the process. And hey, it might help you lose one less transfer next season.
Well said. I couldn't add anything more to that. That was great. Coach Wenrich, I want to thank you for spending some time. We talked about positionless basketball. We talked a lot more, got into some culture and some team building and just the philosophy of coaching in general and where we think the game might be headed. So this is a great conversation, and I know it was super beneficial to those listening. And so I wish you luck. I wish you all the luck with having enough energy to keep wearing all those hats and keep doing the things that you're doing. Best of luck going forward, and hope everything works out well. Everybody stays safe, and you just hit the ground running. And best of luck building that program at the high school level, Coach. You did great.
Hey, thank you, Coach. Appreciate your platform, man. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who listen. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.